The story of the Silk Road begins more than 2,000 years ago. It was not a single road, but a vast network of routes. These paths connected the East and the West, stretching across deserts, mountains, and endless steppes. At its heart stood China during the powerful Han Dynasty. This dynasty laid the foundation for what would become the greatest trade route in history. The Han emperors were ambitious rulers. They expanded their territories and sought to secure distant lands. In doing so, they unlocked pathways that would carry not only goods, but also ideas, beliefs, and dreams. Silk, the most precious fabric of the time, became the symbol of this exchange. Soft, shimmering, and mysterious, it fascinated rulers and merchants alike. But silk was not the only treasure. From China flowed paper, lacquerware, porcelain, and fine metalwork. From distant lands came horses, glassware, spices, and jewels. The Silk Road was never just about wealth. It was about connection, curiosity, and the longing to bridge worlds. The origins of this route can be traced to the Emperor Wu of Han. In the 2nd century BCE, he sent an envoy named Zhang Qian into the unknown. Zhang's mission was to seek allies against nomadic tribes who threatened the empire. But what he discovered was far greater. He brought back knowledge of lands, cultures, and peoples beyond the Chinese horizon. Through his journeys, doors opened between East and West. China now knew of Central Asia, with its swift horses and fertile valleys. The emperors realized that alliances and trade could bring as much power as armies, and so the Silk Road was born. Not from conquest alone, but from curiosity and diplomacy. The early caravans were small and cautious. They moved with care through treacherous deserts like the Taklamakan. Every step was a battle against heat, thirst, and shifting sands. Yet the lure of distant markets was irresistible. Merchants risked everything for the promise of fortune. The mountains posed even greater challenges. The Pamirs and Tian Shan ranges towered over the road. Paths were narrow, dangerous, and often blocked by snow. But where danger lived, opportunity thrived. The Silk Road carved through nature's harshest barriers. Every oasis became a miracle. Cities like Dunhuang, Kashgar, and Turpan grew as lifelines for travelers. Here, merchants rested, exchanged goods, and shared stories. These oases became the jewels of the desert, glowing with culture and diversity. Languages mixed, beliefs intertwined, and friendships were forged in the dust of the road. The Silk Road was more than trade. It was a river of humanity flowing across continents. Buddhist monks carried their teachings westward. Artists painted inspirations they had never seen before. And storytellers whispered tales that would one day reach the ears of kings. At dawn, caravans would rise to the sound of camel bells. Slowly, they would march into the horizon. Each step forward was a gamble, but also a promise. The promise that distant lands could be reached and new wonders discovered. Thus, the Silk Road became a bridge between worlds. The Han Dynasty unknowingly had created a legacy, one that would last for centuries, shaping history itself. Through silk and spices, through paper and porcelain, through dreams and dangers. The world was no longer divided. It was connected forever by the dawn of the Silk Road. The Silk Road was not just a path. It was a lifeline of trade, survival, and adventure. At the heart of this lifeline were the caravans, long winding trains of camels, donkeys, and people marching slowly across vast landscapes. Their bells rang softly, echoing across deserts and mountains. The sound of those bells became the heartbeat of the Silk Road. Every caravan was a moving city. It carried merchants, guards, servants, and sometimes families. Bales of silk were packed carefully into wooden chests. Jars of spices were sealed tightly, their aroma hinting at distant lands. Precious stones were hidden in secret pouches, and fragile glassware was wrapped and guarded as if it were treasure. The caravans traveled in groups for safety. Bandits lurked in the shadows of deserts and mountain passes. Storms could strike without warning. Heat could burn through the day, and bitter cold could freeze the night. Yet the travelers endured, driven by hope and profit. The journey was long, but the reward was greater. The camel was the true hero of the Silk Road. With its humps storing fat, it could survive days without water. Its broad feet spread gently over shifting sands. Its patience outlasted the harshest storms. The camel, often called the ship of the desert, carried civilizations upon its back. Without camels, the Silk Road could never have been born. Imagine the sight. A line of 100 camels, each tied nose to tail, their backs heavy with silk, jade, spices, and porcelain, their bells chiming softly with every step. The sound carried across the desert winds. It was a lullaby for travelers, a promise that they were not alone. Caravans followed a rhythm. They would march at dawn, rest at noon, and camp at night. At sunrise, the desert glowed golden as shadows stretched long. At midday, travelers sought shade beneath tents, shielding themselves from the burning sun. At night, fires were lit, meals were cooked, and stories were shared. Under the blanket of stars, the Silk Road felt eternal. Oases were the lifelines of these journeys. Without them, caravans would perish. In places like Dunhuang, Turpan, and Kashgar, water flowed from underground springs. Palm trees offered shade, and markets bustled with trade. Merchants exchanged goods, news, and culture. Every oasis was a melting pot of languages and ideas. But the journey was never easy. Sandstorms could erase entire caravans in hours. Snow in the high passes could bury travelers alive. Thirst and hunger haunted the weary. Yet still, they pressed forward. For beyond every hardship lay a market filled with riches. Guards rode alongside the caravans. Armed with bows, swords, and spears, they were always alert. Some bandits were desperate men, hungry for survival. Others were organized raiders, swift and merciless. The guards knew that one mistake could cost lives and fortunes. So their eyes never rested, even under the stars. The sound of the camel bells grew into a symbol. For travelers, it was a comfort. For cities, it was a signal that wealth was arriving. For children, it was a song of adventure. And for history, it became the music of connection. Each bell carried the memory of countless journeys across time. The caravans were not only traders, they were messengers of culture. They carried stories, songs, and beliefs across borders. They spread Buddhism from India to China. They introduced glassmaking from Rome to the East. And they brought paper from China to the West. The Silk Road was a path of wonders, but it was also a path of great suffering. Among its hardest trials were the deserts, endless seas of sand stretching beyond sight. They tested the courage of every traveler. They demanded strength, patience, and faith. The Taklamakan Desert was called the Desert of Death. Its dunes rose like golden mountains. The wind howled, shifting sands into waves. Travelers feared its silence more than its storms. For silence in the desert meant danger. Danger of losing the path, danger of losing life. Heat pressed down like a hammer at midday. The ground burned beneath the feet of men and beasts. Lips cracked and throats burned for water. Even shadows seemed to vanish in the blazing light. Yet still, the caravans walked, step by step, following the trail of hope. At night, the desert became another world. The heat vanished, replaced by a biting cold. Fires flickered weakly, shielding travelers from the frost. Stars stretched across the sky, bright and countless. The Milky Way guided those who could not see the road. And the desert whispered secrets in the silence. Life in the desert was a process of endurance. Every step required planning. Every drop of water was counted. Every grain of food was measured. Caravans moved like disciplined armies. For a mistake meant death. Camels bore the brunt of the desert. Their bodies swayed slowly, their humps storing strength. They walked tirelessly, their eyes calm, their pace steady. In their patience, men found courage. In their endurance, empires found survival. Truly, the camel was the soul of the Silk Road. Oases shone like jewels in the emptiness. When a caravan spotted green trees on the horizon, hearts leapt with joy. Water, shade, and rest awaited them. The sound of flowing springs was sweeter than music. Merchants washed dust from their faces. Children laughed and played in the shade of palms. But not every traveler found safety. Sandstorms could strike without warning. Winds roared, burying paths, swallowing tents. Men clung to ropes, shielding their faces. Camels knelt, refusing to move until the storm passed. And many caravans never rose again. Despite the dangers, life continued. Merchants traded, guards protected, and servants labored. Songs were sung by the fires. Stories of faraway lands were whispered to pass the night. Every tale gave strength to the weary. Every word gave hope to the hopeless. The desert was harsh, but it was also a teacher. It taught patience. It taught humility. It taught men that survival was not in wealth, but in unity. That no one could endure alone. That only together could the journey succeed. Through every storm, every step, every drop of sweat, the Silk Road lived. For it was more than sand and stone. It was the lifeline of trade, the bridge of cultures. And though the desert swallowed many, it could never swallow the dream of connection. Thus, the great deserts became part of the Silk Road's soul. Harsh, merciless, yet eternal. They challenged man, but also shaped him. They turned caravans into legends. And they made every victory, every arrival, a triumph. For only those who faced the desert truly understood the value of survival. In the vast emptiness of the Silk Road, where deserts stretched like endless oceans, and mountains rose like walls against the sky, there existed islands of green, miracles of water and shade, the oases of life. An oasis was more than a place. It was a promise of survival, of safety, of rest. For travelers beaten by the desert's fury, the sight of trees meant hope. The sound of water meant life. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze. Springs bubbled with crystal clear water. Fields of barley and orchards of fruit surrounded the wells. Merchants laid down their burdens. Camels bent their knees and drank deeply. Children ran freely, their laughter filling the air. An oasis was a meeting place. Here, cultures mixed, languages blended, stories were shared. From the east came silk, jade, and paper. From the west came glass, wool, and precious metals, all met under the shade of the same trees. At night, the oasis became a world of its own. Fires glowed warmly. Music echoed across the stillness. Drums, flutes, and voices told of distant lands. Dancers moved with grace, their shadows flickering in the firelight. For one night, strangers became family. Life in the oasis was fragile. Every drop of water was guarded. Wells were treasures greater than gold. Without them, the desert would reclaim its hold. So communities grew around these sacred springs, and towns blossomed where once there was only sand. The oases became pearls on the Silk Road's necklace, each one a vital link. Khotan, Kashgar, Dunhuang, names whispered with respect by travelers, for they were more than places. They were lifelines. A merchant who left an oasis carried more than supplies. He carried the blessing of survival. He carried the strength to face the storms again. The memory of shade stayed with him in the desert. The taste of fresh water lingered on his tongue and gave him courage to move forward. Without the oases, the Silk Road could not exist. Without water, there is no trade. Without shade, there is no journey. Without community, there is no connection. Truly, the oases were the heartbeats of the Silk Road, the silent guardians of life. And so, every traveler blessed the green sanctuaries. Every caravan longed for their sight. For in the endless struggle between man and desert, it was the oases that gave victory to life. They stood as symbols of hope, proof that even in the harshest of worlds, life always finds a way. Silk shimmered like moonlight, delicate, smooth, and soft to the touch. It carried with it the mystery of the East and the desire of kings and queens far away. Every thread was worth more than gold. Every garment a symbol of power and luxury. The Chinese guarded its secret fiercely. The method of weaving silk was a sacred art. Only the mulberry trees and silkworms of the East knew the secret. And those who dared to reveal it faced death. For silk was not just cloth. It was empire, it was wealth, it was identity. But silk was not alone on the road. Alongside it traveled the breath of spices. Fragrance carried across deserts. Cinnamon, cardamom, pepper, and saffron, each more precious than silver, each transforming food into magic. Spices were not just for flavor. They were medicine. They were offerings to the gods. They were symbols of health, purity, and prosperity. A pinch of saffron could color a feast. A handful of pepper could change an empire's fortune. Merchants wrapped their treasures in cloth. Caravans filled their sacks with silk and spices, and set forth on journeys across mountains and sands. Guarding every step, for thieves watched the roads. Yet the promise of profit outweighed the risk. And so the caravans moved, slow but steady. At the markets of Samarkand and Kashgar, the air was filled with wonder. Colors of silk in every hue. The scent of spices rising like incense. Buyers from Rome, Persia, and Arabia gathered, eager to touch, to taste, to bargain. Silk whispered of elegance. Spices spoke of adventure. Together, they carried not only trade, but dreams, desires, and connections. They linked distant worlds. They made strangers into partners, and the Silk Road into a living bridge. To wear silk was to wear beauty. To cook with spice was to taste the divine. And both were treasures that bound humanity together. Across deserts, across seas, across time itself. Silk and spices lit the path and turned the Silk Road into a river of life. The Silk Road was not only a road of goods, it was a road of people, men and women who dared to wander, merchants who carried treasure on their backs, and wanderers who carried stories in their hearts. The merchant was a bridge between worlds. He spoke many tongues. He knew the value of silk in Rome, the worth of spices in Persia, and the hunger for gems in India. He measured profit not only in coins, but in trust, reputation, and survival. Every journey was a gamble. Sandstorms could bury a caravan. Bandits could strike from the shadows. And thirst could take more lives than the sword. Yet still the merchants moved. For beyond every risk there was reward. Beyond every desert there was a market. The wanderers were different. They did not carry goods, but carried questions. They sought wisdom, faith, and meaning. Some were monks walking to India, seeking sacred texts and holy teachers. Others were travelers from Greece or Rome, hoping to see wonders told in whispers. Every meeting was an exchange, not only of silk and spices, but of songs, stories, and beliefs. A merchant might sell cloth, but hear a tale of distant gods. A wanderer might find a meal, but share a story of his homeland. And so, the Silk Road became a web of human connection. In the caravansaries, the inns of the desert, merchants and wanderers gathered. The air thick with smoke, laughter, and bargains. Maps were drawn in dust. Stories were painted in words. And friendships born under starlit skies. Merchants built wealth. Wanderers built bridges of understanding. Together, they wove the fabric of the Silk Road. A fabric richer than any silk. A treasure greater than any spice. For it was the human spirit, the courage to move, to trade, to dream. The road lived through them. Every step, every bargain, every word was another thread in the endless tapestry. Merchants and wanderers were its heartbeat. And without them, the Silk Road would have been silent sand. The Silk Road was never safe. It crossed deserts, mountains, and endless plains. It wound through kingdoms and empires, and in every shadow there was danger. To protect the road, there were guardians. Kings sent soldiers to patrol the routes. City walls rose where traders gathered, and watchtowers looked over the dunes. Without protection, no caravan could survive. Bandits waited in silence. They struck swift and vanished into the dust. Merchants feared the arrow more than the storm. For one raid could destroy a journey. And so, guardians became the lifeblood of trade. Some guardians were soldiers of the Han Dynasty, stationed at garrisons along the frontier. They guarded mountain passes, watched desert borders, and carried the emperor's seal of authority. They kept order where chaos always threatened. Other guardians were local tribes, nomads who knew the steppe better than any map. Some demanded tribute to let caravans pass. Others offered their spears as escorts. Their loyalty was uncertain, but their knowledge of land was priceless. In the West, Parthian riders watched the routes, their horsemen swift and fierce. They controlled valleys and guarded markets, for they too lived by the flow of trade. Every empire, east and west, had its sentinels, each sworn to keep the path alive. Caravan leaders were guardians too. They chose the roads, judged the weather, and led men and animals with steady hands. Their wisdom was protection. Their leadership was a shield. Even silence was a guardian. For in the stillness of desert nights, the stars guided the lost, and the endless sky watched over the weary. The Silk Road survived because of them. The soldiers, the tribes, the leaders, the guardians of the path. They did not carry silk or spices, but without them, no treasure would ever reach its market. They were the unseen strength of the journey, the protectors of hope and trade. The Silk Road was not just a road of trade, it was a road of encounters, where strangers became neighbors, and merchants became messengers of worlds unseen. In the markets of Samarkand and Kashgar, silk touched gold, spices mingled with perfumes, and words of many tongues filled the air. It was a chorus of humanity, each voice carrying a story from afar. Chinese, Persians, Indians, and Greeks. Arabs, Romans, Turks, and Mongols. All passed along the same paths, each leaving behind a trace of their world. A flavor, a belief, a vision. Religions flowed like rivers along the road. Buddhist monks carried scriptures to distant temples. Christian traders brought the cross into foreign lands. Islamic scholars spread wisdom across continents. And Zoroastrian fire found new homes in faraway shrines. Languages intertwined. Sanskrit echoed beside Greek. Persian blended with Chinese. And Arabic carried knowledge through the sands. The Silk Road became a living library, each traveler adding a page. Art and music blossomed at this crossroads. Patterns from Persia shaped Chinese silk. Greek sculpture inspired Buddhist statues, and instruments traveled from desert tents to royal courts. Every melody was a mixture, every painting a shared vision. Food told its own story. Rice met bread. Tea met wine. And spices turned simple meals into feasts of the world. The taste of the Silk Road was the taste of unity. But beyond trade and travel, the greatest gift was connection. Empires rose and fell. But the friendships, the blended ideas, the shared dreams, these remained. They became the soul of the Silk Road. At every crossroad, cultures did not just meet. They embraced. And from their embrace, a new world was born. Along the winding roads of the Silk Road, not only silk and spices traveled, but also the quiet wisdom of the Buddha. Monks walked barefoot across deserts, their robes simple, their bowls empty, carrying nothing but faith and sacred texts. Their journey was not for gold, but for the light of awakening. From the heart of India, Buddhism spread to Central Asia, then further to China, Korea, and Japan. The teachings flowed like a gentle stream, crossing mountains, deserts, and empires. In the monasteries built near caravanserais, travelers found not just rest, but peace of spirit. The chanting of monks mingled with the sounds of trade, and weary merchants found solace in prayer. Images of the Buddha changed with every land. In Gandhara, he took the form of Greek sculpture. In China, he gained the serenity of jade. In Japan, he wore the calm of the rising sun. Each culture shaped his face, yet the message remained the same. Compassion, mindfulness, and release from suffering. Pilgrims became storytellers. They carried parables, sutras, and songs. And along the road, these stories grew, translated into countless tongues, binding strangers with a common faith. Temples rose where trade flourished. Statues of the Buddha stood tall where markets once buzzed. And the Silk Road became not just a marketplace, but a path to enlightenment. Through Buddhism, the road became sacred, a highway of the spirit, where wisdom was the most precious cargo. The Silk Road was not only a path of trade, it was also a path of imagination, where myths and legends grew with every step. Caravans told stories by the fire, whispers of dragons guarding mountains, and spirits that wandered the desert sands. Some spoke of hidden cities, buried beneath dunes shining with gold, where only the pure-hearted could enter. Others told of valleys where music echoed, played not by men, but by celestial beings. In Persia, tales of Simurgh the giant bird spread hope and wonder to weary travelers. In China, the dragon became the guardian of silk, a protector of secrets too precious to reveal. The road itself became alive in stories. Mountains were said to whisper, rivers to remember, and stars to guide merchants to safety. Legends spoke of wandering monks who glowed with light in the darkest nights, and of merchants who vanished, only to return with treasures unknown to the world. At every crossroad, myths were exchanged, some as warnings, some as blessings. And so, the Silk Road became more than geography. It became a dream woven with fear, faith, and wonder. Even today, echoes of those stories remain in the ruins of forgotten cities and in the imagination of those who walk the desert. The Silk Road lives on, not only in history, but in legend. The Silk Road was long and merciless, stretching across deserts, mountains, and endless plains. And at the heart of this journey stood the dromedary, the ship of the desert, with a single hump, tall legs, and unmatched endurance. The dromedary carried silk, spices, and precious goods. Its padded feet touched the burning sands, as if the desert itself had shaped them. Caravans could not move without them. For no horse, no mule, no ox could survive the cruel journey. The dromedary drank deeply once, and walked for days without thirst. Merchants trusted their rhythm, a sway like the rocking of a boat, guiding them safely through the storms of sand. Through the silence of endless horizons, stories tell of camels sensing danger, smelling rain from miles away, and kneeling to protect their riders from the desert winds. To travelers, they were more than beasts. They were companions, guardians, even symbols of fortune. Children along the Silk Road sang songs, praising the patience of the dromedary. Poets called them gifts of the East, and wise men saw in them lessons of survival. Without the dromedary, the Silk Road may never have been traveled, for they were the silent heroes that stitched together worlds far apart. The ships of the desert still stand tall. Echoes of their footprints remain in the sands, telling us that trade, culture, and history once rode upon their steady backs, far across deserts and seas. Two great civilizations stirred in silence, Rome in the west, and Han China in the east. Merchants carried whispers of silk. Coins of emperors glimmered in foreign hands. Spices and gems spoke of journeys untold, while silk itself became the fabric of dreams. Though oceans and empires lay between them, the Silk Road drew invisible threads, binding the sons of heaven to the mighty legions of Rome. Curiosity bridged what distance could not. Roman glassware reached Chinese courts, and bolts of silk dazzled Roman markets, each side imagining wonders about the other. Romans called China Ceres, the land of silk, a mysterious realm at the edge of the world, while Chinese envoys spoke of a faraway power, where eagles ruled and cities of marble shone. Though no emperors met face to face, their merchants were ambassadors. Their caravans became envoys of peace, carrying not only goods, but the spirit of exchange. The meeting of Rome and the eldest was not of armies, but of ideas. Not of conquest, but of commerce. A silent handshake across continents. And so, the Silk Road became a mirror where East and West gazed upon each other, seeing not enemies, but reflections of shared desire for beauty, knowledge, and trade. In the heart of ancient China, a humble invention took root, not of gold nor of silk, but of paper, fragile yet eternal. Sheets made from mulberry bark and hemp held words more precious than jewels. The brush danced upon them, preserving thought beyond the moment. Along the Silk Road these pages traveled, from scholar to monk, from merchant to scribe, carrying poems, prayers, and laws across deserts, mountains, and seas. With paper came knowledge, the secrets of astronomy and medicine, mathematics etched with precision, and philosophies that shaped the mind. In the hands of Buddhist monks, sutras were copied with devotion, their teachings carried on fragile sheets, guiding souls along unseen paths. The Arabs received this treasure. In Samarkand, they mastered the craft. Their presses echoed with the wisdom of the East, and libraries grew, vast as deserts. From Baghdad to Cordoba, paper became the vessel of ideas, preserving Greek thought, Persian science, and Indian numbers, binding worlds in shared wisdom. Europe too awakened with its arrival. Universities rose, hungry for texts, and knowledge, once confined to stone and parchment, flowed freely upon rivers of paper. Thus the Silk Road carried more than trade. It carried the mind of humanity itself, ideas traveling swifter than caravans, and wisdom enduring longer than empires. The Tang Dynasty rose in splendor. Its capital, Chang'an, gleamed like a jewel. Wide streets filled with merchants and envoys, voices mingling in 100 tongues. Here, the Silk Road found its heartbeat, a true golden age of exchange, where caravans arrived in endless streams, bringing treasures from the farthest corners of the earth. Silk shimmered like flowing rivers. Spices perfumed the crowded markets. Ivory and jade glistened in the sun, while rare horses stamped the cobbled streets. Chang'an was more than a marketplace. It was a meeting ground of civilizations. Persian musicians strummed their lutes. Indian monks spread sacred sutras, and Arab scholars brought with them the wisdom of the stars. In the tea houses and academies, ideas flowed as richly as wine. Astronomy, medicine, and poetry were shared, debated, and preserved. The Tang emperors knew the power of connection. They guarded the roads with soldiers, built watchtowers in deserts, and secured the oases with alliances. Diplomatic envoys traveled far and wide, carrying silk as gifts of friendship. forging bonds with Byzantines, Persians, and Arabs, uniting distant courts under the banner of trade. Buddhism flourished under their patronage. Great temples rose along the caravan trails. Carved Buddhas watched silently from cliffs, blessing travelers who passed beneath their gaze. But it was not only goods and faith that traveled. Music, dance, and fashion crossed borders too. Persian robes dazzled in Chinese courts, while Chinese ceramics graced tables in the West. The Silk Road under the Tang was a living river, a current of wealth, culture, and knowledge, binding the vast world into one great network and making the empire shine brighter than ever. Even today, echoes of that golden age remain in the melodies of shared songs, in the recipes that blend East and West, and in the memory of a road that once connected all mankind. Across the endless grasslands of Central Asia, the wind whispered through tall grasses, and hooves thundered like rolling drums. Here lived the nomads of the steppe. They were born in the saddle, raised beside their horses, swift as the falcon, and fierce as the storm. The horse was their lifeblood. It carried them across deserts and plains. It gave them milk, meat, and shelter. And it bore them into battle with unyielding strength. Tribes roamed freely, building tents of felt beneath the vast skies, moving with the seasons, following the rhythm of grass, sun, and rain. When caravans of the Silk Road entered these lands, they came under the watchful eyes of the nomads. For the steppes were both gateway and barrier, a place where fortunes could be made or lost. The Mongols, above all, rose to power, united by the vision of Genghis Khan. He forged scattered tribes into a single storm that swept across continents with unmatched force. On horseback, the Mongols were invincible. They moved faster than any army before them, striking with precision, then vanishing into the horizon. Their bows sang, and empires trembled. But the Mongols were not only conquerors, they were also guardians of the Silk Road. They secured the caravan routes, built relay stations for travelers, and allowed merchants to cross vast distances in safety. Under their watch, trade flourished. Spices, silks, and jewels traveled in greater numbers. Scholars, doctors, and astronomers exchanged their knowledge, and the world grew smaller, more connected than ever. The power of the horse made it all possible. A creature that carried warriors, traders, and dreamers alike. Through endless steppes and across mighty empires, binding east and west with speed and strength, the legacy of the nomads lives on, in the memory of their conquests, in the stories of their riders, and in the image of the horse, eternal companion of mankind. When the deserts of Arabia gave rise to Islam, a new faith began to spread like dawn across the horizon. Carried by merchants, travelers, and scholars, it flowed along the Silk Road like a river of belief and culture. The message of unity, of one God, resonated with distant peoples. It touched the hearts of traders in the bazaars and shaped the daily lives of cities along the routes. Arabic became the language of trade, of contracts, letters, and business exchanges. It carried not only goods, but also words of poetry and ideas that traveled farther than caravans ever could. Mosques rose along the routes, their minarets calling the faithful to prayer. And within their walls, weary travelers found shelter. Hospitality became a hallmark of the Islamic lands. But Islam brought more than faith. It ushered in a golden age of science and knowledge. Arab scholars translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts. They preserved wisdom that might have been lost, and in turn, created new discoveries of their own. Mathematics, astronomy, and medicine flourished. The numerals we use today traveled westward. Stars were mapped with greater precision, and cures for illness crossed from Baghdad to faraway Europe. The great cities of Islamic civilization, Baghdad, Samarkand, and Bukhara, became shining jewels on the Silk Road, centers of trade, learning, and faith. Caravans carried silks and spices, but they also carried calligraphy, architecture, and music. The pointed arch, the flowing script, the melody of oud and drum, all became part of the cultural tapestry of the road. Merchants paused in caravanserais, where lamps burned late into the night, as deals were made in many tongues, and stories told of faraway lands and prophets' wisdom. Islamic law, or Sharia, gave order to trade. Contracts were honored, measures were fair. Trust grew among distant merchants, and the Silk Road thrived under this moral compass. The Arabic influence stretched like a bridge, connecting China to Spain, binding India to North Africa, and weaving cultures together in a single fabric. Faith and trade walked hand in hand, and the hum of markets blended with the call to prayer. Together, they shaped a civilization. That turned the Silk Road into more than a highway of goods. It became a highway of ideas, of light, and of hope. In the 13th century, a young Venetian named Marco Polo set forth on a journey. His path wound through deserts, mountains, and bustling markets, guided by merchants, monks, and wanderers, until he reached the dazzling courts of the East. The Silk Road had long been traveled by countless souls. But Polo's story became the voice that echoed in Europe. For he saw not only the goods of trade, but the grandeur of civilizations unknown to the West. In the court of Kublai Khan, the Mongol emperor, Polo marveled at wealth and wisdom. Cities of immense size, canals flowing with commerce, and palaces glittering like jewels in the desert sun. He described paper money, strange to European eyes, markets filled with silk, spices, and porcelain, temples rising in honor of gods foreign to the West, and a land that seemed endless in wonder. When Polo returned, his tales stirred imagination. Europe listened in awe, disbelief, and hunger for discovery. His book, The Travels of Marco Polo, became a window into the East for generations. To some, it was fantasy, a story too grand to be believed. But to others, it was a map, a guide to riches waiting across deserts and seas. Through his words, the Silk Road became legend. Not just a path of trade, but a realm of marvels. A place where East and West met in dazzling splendor, and where imagination soared beyond borders. Marco Polo's vision would inspire explorers. Men like Columbus, who sought routes to the riches Polo described. His legacy was not in goods he carried, but in the dreams he left behind. The Silk Road of the West became a myth, a tapestry woven from Polo's stories. And through those stories, Europe's hunger for exploration grew, opening the doors to a new age of discovery. For centuries, the Silk Road had thrived. It carried silk, spices, knowledge, and faith. It bound empires together in trade and trust, and it shaped the destiny of both East and West. But no road lasts forever. No empire stands eternal. And the Silk Road, too, began to tremble under the weight of war, disease, and shifting winds of time. Mongol power had once brought peace. Their empire stretched from the Yellow Sea to the Black Sea. But as their rule weakened, unity fractured, and the roads once guarded became paths of danger. Bandits prowled the deserts. Warlords claimed the mountain passes, and caravans that once traveled freely now feared the journey that once promised fortune. Then came the Black Death. The plague moved as silently as the caravans, carried by merchants, rats, and fleas. It spread across cities linked by the Silk Road. From Asia to Europe, it claimed millions. Markets emptied, villages withered, and trade faltered. The very arteries of commerce became veins of death, and the lifeblood of the Silk Road grew thin. At the same time, the seas beckoned. Europe's sailors sought faster, safer routes. Ships carried goods across oceans, bypassing deserts and mountains once essential. The discovery of maritime trade paths weakened the Silk Road's grip, for merchants no longer needed to risk storms of sand when they could ride the winds of the sea. The once glorious road grew quiet. Oases emptied, caravans dwindled, markets faded. Cities that had thrived on trade now stood as ruins, echoes of forgotten wealth. Yet even in decline, the Silk Road's spirit endured. Its memory lived in stories, in ruins, and in legends. Though its power faded, its legacy remained, for it had already reshaped the world. The fall of the Silk Road was not its end, but a transformation from dust and desert trails to waves and sails across boundless seas. And so the Silk Road declined, not in silence, but in transition. Its spirit shifting from land to ocean, from caravans to ships, from camels to sails. Though the Silk Road declined as a highway of trade, its influence continued to shape civilizations. For along its winding paths had traveled more than silk and spices. It carried the treasures of the human mind. Art blossomed through its exchanges. Chinese painters learned patterns from Persian craftsmen. Glasswork from the Middle East reached the courts of China, and motifs from India danced upon the fabrics of Europe. Every brushstroke, every woven thread bore echoes of distant lands. The Silk Road became not just a market, but a canvas upon which cultures painted each other's beauty. Science, too, rode the caravans. From India came numerals, changing the way the world counted. From the Middle East came astronomy, refining how the stars were read. And from China came the compass, guiding ships beyond the horizon. Knowledge crossed deserts like invisible treasure. It transformed medicine, mathematics, and engineering. Empires grew not only in wealth, but in wisdom carried by travelers and teachers. And what of faith and philosophy? Buddhism traveled eastward, carving temples into mountains. Islam spread along the routes, bringing calligraphy, poetry, and new law, while Christianity and Zoroastrianism left their echoes too. The Silk Road was a meeting ground of the soul, a place where belief and reason intertwined, where shrines rose beside markets, and wisdom flowed as freely as gold and silk. Even music carried the Silk Road's voice. Flutes from Central Asia reached China. Lutes and drums from Persia echoed in Byzantium. And songs born in one desert were sung in another. So, though the road itself faded, its gifts endured. In every painting, in every book, in every prayer. The Silk Road still whispered across time. Its legacy was not bound to stone or sand, but to memory, to knowledge, to imagination. It was a bridge that outlived its own foundations, and it still shapes the world we know today. The Silk Road is no longer marked upon the maps of merchants. Its caravan trails lie silent under the dust of forgotten deserts. The wheels of wagons no longer creak across its winding roads. Yet the Silk Road lives on, not in stone, but in spirit. It endures in the stories we tell, in the fabrics we wear, in the spices that still enrich our tables, and in the melodies that echo from culture to culture. Every city it once touched still bears its mark. Samarkand with its blue domes, Bukhara with its caravanserais, Xi'an with its ancient walls, and Constantinople, gateway between worlds. Through them, we glimpse the breath of the past. The Silk Road's life is etched into their streets, into their markets, into their people. But the Silk Road's greatest treasure was not silk, nor gold, nor gems. It was connection, a bridge of humanity across vast distances. A reminder that cultures are never truly alone. Its whispers still reach us in modern trade, in global networks of ships, trains, and planes, in the digital webs that carry voices across continents. For today's world is but a reflection of that ancient road, and its legacy breathes in art, where East meets West upon the canvas, in science, where knowledge from many lands built the foundation of discovery, in religion, where beliefs mingled, reshaped, and journeyed into new lands. The Silk Road's eternal power lies not in what was sold, but in what was shared. The laughter of strangers who became friends, the wisdom of teachers who became legends, the courage of travelers who carried more than goods. They carried dreams. In the hush of the desert wind, in the quiet prayer of a monk, in the steady hand of a merchant writing accounts. The Silk Road still breathes. It whispers in the night that we are all connected, that no boundary can hold back the tide of human curiosity, that the hunger to learn, to share, to discover will always unite us. The Silk Road is eternal, not as a road of sand and stone, but as a path in the human spirit, a road that never dies. It remains alive in every story we tell, in every memory carried forward, in every bond across cultures. The Silk Road is not gone. It is within us, a legacy that never fades, a road that never ends, an eternal journey that still guides the soul of humanity.